Judge me if you want, but tell me first, is it my fault if a man enjoys caring about me? I never promised Adrian anything. I only let him stay close because being wanted made me feel alive, and my husband had stopped chasing me years ago. Of course, my husband called it cruel because he always needed clean rules for messy feelings. So when Adrian wrapped a blanket around both of us at the party, I leaned into his arms and let my husband see exactly how little his rules controlled me. He stood across the patio with his phone low in his hand, calm as ever. By the end of that night, I was sure he had finally learned his place. My name is Delaney Cross. I was 32, and of course, as a brand partnership manager, I understood attention better than most people. I never promised Adrian anything. I only let him stay close because being wanted made me feel like a woman, and my husband had stopped chasing me years before that night. Graham called it cruel because my husband always needed clean rules for feelings that were not clean. So when Adrian wrapped a blanket around both of us at the party, I leaned into his arms and let my husband see exactly how little his rules controlled me. He stood across the patio with his phone low in his hand, calm as ever, and by the end of that night, I was sure he had finally learned his place. People like to pretend marriage ends in one loud moment. It does not. It gets quiet first. Quiet in the hallway. Quiet in the car. Quiet when your husband fixes the loose cabinet door but does not touch your waist when he passes you. Quiet when he remembers the insurance payment but forgets to look at you like you are still possible. Graham was not a bad husband. That is the part people never like when they judge me. They want him perfect, or me cruel, because then the story is easier to swallow. But he was good in ways that made me feel trapped. He paid bills before I remembered them. He filled my gas tank if he borrowed my car. He kept the house running like a small company with clean folders and working lights. Once, before we were married, he drove 3 hours in rain because I had left a presentation drive on our kitchen counter. I had a pitch that morning, the kind that could change my career, and I called him crying from a hotel lobby. He did not make me beg. He just came. When he arrived, his shirt was damp, his hair was flat, and he handed me the little silver drive like it was nothing. After I won the account, we went to a late-night diner and split pancakes even though neither of us was hungry. He watched me talk with syrup on my sleeve and smiled like I was the whole room. That was real. I do not deny that. But marriage changed the shape of him. Or maybe it showed me the shape I had ignored. Graham loved through action, repairs, calendars, quiet planning. He thought choosing me once meant I should feel chosen every day after. Of course, that sounds noble when you say it fast. It feels different when you are standing in a new dress and your husband only asks if you remembered to lock the back door. I started to hate how safe I was. At work, I knew how to make people want things. Want a campaign, want a deal, want to sit closer to the right person at a hotel terrace wine night. That was my talent. I could read a room before the first glass was empty. So when I say I did not notice Adrian changing around me, I would be lying. I noticed everything. Adrian Vale had been my best friend for years. He was warm in a way Graham was not. He sent messages after events not because he needed information, but because he wanted to know if I got home. He remembered that I liked cinnamon in coffee. He noticed small things. A new perfume. A tired voice. A dress Graham had seen only long enough to ask whether the receipt was still in the bag. At first, it felt harmless. Of course it did. That is how useful things begin. Adrian was not some stranger from a bar. He was inside our circle. He had sat at our table. He had helped us move a bookshelf when Graham hurt his shoulder. He knew my husband. My husband knew him. That made it cleaner in my mind. The first time Graham asked about him, he did it softly. We were in our hallway after a hotel terrace charity night, and my feet hurt from standing in heels for 4 hours. Graham had left dinner warming in the oven. He had also fixed the loose cabinet by the sink. Practical love lined up neatly, waiting for applause. He asked what had changed with Adrian lately. That was all. No shouting. No accusation. Just soft curiosity, which somehow felt worse. I told him nothing had changed. I said Adrian was my friend. I said my husband was making something ugly out of simple kindness. Graham looked at me for a few seconds. Then he placed his phone face down on the hallway table. I remember that because it annoyed me. It was such a Graham thing to do. Close the screen. Close the conversation. Go quiet when feelings needed heat. I read it as him fading, the way he always faded when he had nothing useful to say. That night at the charity terrace, the air had turned cold after sunset. We were standing near a tall heater that barely worked, and I rubbed my arms without meaning to. Graham noticed and put his jacket around my shoulders. No drama, no tenderness, just a solution. Adrian saw it and laughed. He said Graham solved problems like a facilities manager. I laughed too long, longer than the joke deserved. Graham smiled a little, but his eyes did not follow the smile. His phone went face down on the cocktail table beside his untouched glass. Of course, I told myself he was sulking. That was easier than asking why Adrian's joke had pleased me so much. I liked the way Adrian looked at me after that. Not openly. Not in a way anyone could accuse. But with a softness that followed me from the terrace to the elevator, then from the elevator to my phone later that night. He messaged that I looked cold even with Graham's jacket. I read it twice before deleting the preview from my lock screen. I did not answer right away. That was part of it too. Waiting made the attention stretch. It made me feel in control of something warm, something alive, something that had not already been signed, sealed, and filed under wife. The next morning, Graham asked if Adrian had texted after the event. Again, soft. Again, careful. My husband always sounded careful when he was already late. I told him he was embarrassing himself. That changed the room. Not loudly. Just enough. Graham picked up his coffee, lowered his phone beside his plate, and nodded like I had answered a different question than the one he asked. I thought that meant he understood. I thought he would learn to stop asking. What I planned next was simple. I would keep my friendship. I would keep my marriage. I would keep the feeling Adrian gave me without owing him anything clear. Because I had not crossed any line. Not a real one. Not yet. And if my husband wanted to call that cruel, then maybe he needed to remember what it felt like to want me. Adrian became useful so slowly that I could still call it friendship without sounding foolish. He did not arrive with flowers or speeches. He arrived with coffee when my calendar was packed, with a phone charger when mine died, with a message after every event asking if I got home. Small things. Safe things. Things a woman could accept without owing anything. Of course, that was the beauty of it. If Graham asked, I could say he was making kindness dirty. If Mara asked, I could laugh and say Adrian had always been sweet. If Adrian looked at me too long, I could pretend I had not seen it. That was how I kept the shape of my life clean while still taking what I wanted from the edges. My husband noticed more than I gave him credit for. Not loudly. Graham never did anything loudly unless something in the house broke. He noticed like he fixed things, quietly, with his sleeves pushed up and his face unreadable. The first real argument came after Adrian left a client dinner early to pick me up outside a rooftop event downtown. Graham had already offered to come. I told him not to because I did not want him waiting in traffic after work. That was true enough to be useful. Then Adrian texted that he was nearby, and I accepted before I gave myself time to make it innocent. When I slid into his car, the seat heater was already on. He had bought my cinnamon coffee. He asked if the event people had treated me like I mattered. That question did something to me. Not because it was deep, because Graham would have asked if I had remembered my laptop bag. Adrian asked about me. I told myself that was the difference between being managed and being wanted. When I got home, Graham was in the kitchen, rinsing a pan he had used for dinner. He asked why Adrian had driven me home when he had already offered. Specific. Calm. No drama. He even named the restaurant Adrian had left, the time my event ended, and the fact that I had told Graham I did not need a ride at 6:14. The exactness irritated me. It made him sound less like a husband and more like an accountant auditing my evening. I told him that if he had enough energy to track times, maybe he could use some of it to make me feel like a woman instead of a schedule. Graham dried his hands slowly. His phone was on the counter beside him, face down, the black case catching the kitchen light. He asked if Adrian knew I was letting him hope. I heard control. I heard jealousy dressed up as concern. So I told my husband he was embarrassing himself again. That gave me room to move. It always did. If I made him the jealous one, I did not have to answer the real question. The next day, Mara leaned against my office doorway with her paper cup and wanted to know why I looked so pleased with myself. I told her Graham was acting strange about Adrian. She smiled before I finished, because Mara loved any story where a woman made a man uncomfortable. She said married did not mean buried. She said a little attention kept a woman alive. She said Graham should be glad I came home at all. I laughed because it sounded bold, and bold always sounded like freedom when Mara said it. But even while she laughed, she watched me a little too closely. That was new. I ignored it because her approval still felt better than caution. Adrian kept showing up in ways that were easy to defend. He carried sample boxes from my office to my car when Graham was stuck in a meeting. He sent me a link to a grey wool blanket because I had said hotel terraces were always freezing. He remembered that I hated being cold more than I hated bad wine. I told Graham none of that unless I had to. Not because I was hiding anything real, I told myself, but because my husband had started making simple things sound heavy. The first deliberate omission came on a Thursday. Adrian asked if Graham was upset with how close we were. I had my answer ready. I could have said yes, and I could have said my husband wanted clearer lines. I could have said Adrian was important to me, but there was no chance for anything else. Instead, I told him Graham had been distant for a long time, and that sometimes I missed being chosen before I had to ask. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear on my phone. Then Adrian replied that I should never have to beg for warmth. I did not correct him. I let that sentence sit between us like a door left open. Later, at a casual brunch, Tessa saw more than she wanted to. Adrian's sister was sitting across from me when the patio wind picked up. I rubbed my arms once and Adrian stood before anyone else moved. He asked the server for a blanket and draped it around my shoulders with careful hands. Tessa looked from his face to mine. Her mouth tightened. She said nothing. I told myself she was protective because sisters always think no woman is good enough. Of course, that made it easier not to care. Graham did care. That night, he asked what I thought Adrian believed was happening. Soft again, but less soft than before. I said Adrian was a grown man, and I was not responsible for every feeling another person decided to have. Graham placed his phone face down on the coffee table and looked at it for a second before looking back at me. He told me there was a difference between being kind and keeping someone hungry. I hated that line because it almost sounded true. So I made it ugly. I told him he only wanted me to cut Adrian off because he could not stand seeing another man do what he had stopped doing. Graham did not answer right away. He just nodded once like he was putting my words somewhere I could not reach. That silence should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made me want to prove he had no right to command me. By the time Simone announced her backyard birthday party, I already knew Adrian would be there. I knew the weather would be cold. I knew Graham would watch me. And I knew exactly how to make him understand that being my husband did not mean he owned the last version of me anyone would ever want. Simone's backyard birthday party gave me the perfect stage because it did not look like a stage at all. It looked harmless. Patio lights hung over the fence. 2 fire pits smoked near the stone path. People stood with plastic wine glasses and paper plates, leaning close because the air had that sharp, late-season bite that makes every laugh sound warmer than it is. Of course, I noticed the blanket basket before I noticed the cake. Grey wool, cream fleece, 1 red throw folded badly on top. I noticed Adrian noticing me notice it too. That was the part I liked. My husband arrived beside me, quiet in his dark coat, carrying the gift bag Simone had asked us to bring because Graham never forgot practical things. On the drive there, he had asked if I planned to make the night difficult. Soft voice, careful hands on the wheel. I told him he was calling my friendship a problem because he could not admit he had stopped making me feel like a woman. He said he was not talking about friendship. He was talking about hope. I laughed because hope sounded too dramatic for coffee, rides, and a man who liked making sure I was warm. Inside the yard, Adrian found me within 10 minutes. He asked if Graham was still upset. I told him my husband had a talent for turning simple things into moral lectures. Adrian looked relieved and wounded at the same time, which should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, I let him stand close enough that his sleeve brushed mine when Simone brought out the first round of drinks. Tessa watched from near the dessert table. Nolan was taking photos by the heater, but his camera kept lowering whenever he looked our way. Mara came late, kissed my cheek, and asked if I was behaving. I told her I was always behaving. She smiled, but not with her whole face. That annoyed me, so I turned more toward Adrian. If people wanted to act like I was doing something dangerous, then I would show them how ordinary it could look. The cold helped. It moved through my dress and into my shoulders. I rubbed my arms once, not too much, just enough. Adrian saw it before Graham moved. Or maybe Graham saw it and chose not to perform. Either way, Adrian went to the basket and picked up the grey wool blanket. He asked if I wanted it. I could have taken it from him. I could have wrapped myself and walked back to my husband. I could have stood near the heater like any sensible woman at a backyard party. But sensible women do not get remembered. I sat on the outdoor sofa instead. Adrian sat beside me. The cushion dipped between us, and he opened the blanket across both our laps. For 1 second his hands paused, careful and almost shy. That pause was the question he never asked. I answered by moving closer. The blanket came around my shoulders. His arms settled behind me, then around me. Not tight, not bold, soft enough to deny, close enough to count. The fire cracked. Someone near the drinks table laughed at the wrong moment. I found Graham across the patio, standing near the second fire pit with his glass still full. His phone was low in his hand. His face was calm. Too calm for a man whose wife was tucked under a blanket with another man in front of their friends. I wanted anger. I wanted him to walk over. I wanted the room to see that he still cared enough to lose control. Instead, his thumb moved once against the screen, and he stayed where he was. That made me bolder. I leaned my head back against Adrian's shoulder for just long enough that nobody could pretend they missed it. Adrian's breath changed. His hand pressed lightly over the blanket at my upper arm. He murmured that I was freezing. I smiled up at him and told him he was saving my life, because of course a woman is allowed to be grateful when someone takes care of her. Simone looked away first. Nolan did not. Tessa's mouth went flat. Mara lifted her glass but did not drink. I could feel the whole patio pretending not to measure the space between my body and Adrian's. So I made the space smaller. When Graham finally came closer, he did not raise his voice. He did not ask me to stand. He only asked if I was warm enough now. Quiet debrief. That was his mode, always. Make a question sound harmless while stuffing judgment under every word. I told him Adrian had handled it, and I added that my husband did not need to worry because he was never the type to make a scene anyway. The line landed harder than I expected. A few people went still. Adrian's arm stiffened. Graham looked at me, then at Adrian, then at the blanket. His phone stayed low. He lifted it just enough to check the screen, then lowered it again. I read that as retreat. I read the stillness as proof that he had nothing left but silence. For 1 thin second, Adrian's fingers tightened over the blanket, and I understood something I did not want to hold. He was not performing for Graham. He was not helping me prove a point. He was hoping. The thought touched me, then I pushed it away. Grown men are responsible for their own feelings. That was the clean sentence. That was the sentence I kept. Later, when the cake came out, I stayed under the blanket longer than I needed to. I let Adrian bring me another drink. I let Graham stand alone by the fire with his phone face down on the brick edge, as if the night had become too boring for him to watch. Mara stopped making jokes. Tessa left early with a tight hug for her brother and no hug for me. Nolan passed behind my chair and asked, low enough that only I could hear, whether Adrian knew I was never actually leaving my husband. I laughed because the alternative was answering. I told him everyone knew what this was. Nolan did not laugh back. By the time we left Simone's yard, smoke clung to my coat, Adrian's warmth clung to my side, and Graham's silence followed me into the car. I told myself silence meant defeat. I told myself I had made my point. And when my husband drove home without asking another question, I decided the next move would be mine. The ride home from Simone's party was worse because Graham did not give me the fight I had earned. He kept both hands on the wheel and drove through the quiet streets like we were coming back from the grocery store, not from a patio where his wife had sat under a blanket with another man. The smoke from the fire pit still clung to my coat. Adrian's warmth still sat on one side of my body like a private mark. My husband did not ask about it. He did not mention the blanket. He did not say Adrian's name. That made me angrier than any accusation would have, because silence gave me nothing to push against. At home, he hung his coat, placed his phone face down on the hallway table, and stood there with his keys still in his hand. I told him he could stop acting wounded because nobody had done anything to him. He asked if that was what I believed. Calm, careful, almost tired. I hated that tone. It made him sound older than us. It made the marriage feel like paperwork waiting on a desk. I told him that if seeing me under a blanket made him feel threatened, then maybe he should ask why another man noticed I was cold before he did. Graham said Adrian noticed because I made sure he had the chance. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He only said the pattern had become too clear to ignore. Coffee, rides, messages, favors. The way I let Adrian hover and then called it friendship when someone named it. I laughed because listing things always made my husband feel safe. My husband could turn a wound into bullet points and then wonder why I did not feel loved. I told him he was not talking about Adrian at all. He was talking about control. He said he was talking about honesty. He said Adrian deserved to know there was no future in what I kept letting him feel. That word deserved bothered me. It put Adrian on the clean side and me on the dirty side. Of course, I could not allow that. I said Adrian was a grown man, not a child waiting for instructions. I said I was allowed to have a male best friend. I said Graham wanted me smaller because he had stopped knowing how to keep me close. Then something in his face moved. Not anger, not victory. Sadness, maybe. But I did not call it that. He said he had not known marriage meant he had to keep auditioning for me. He said he thought building a life was also a way of choosing me. The words were simple. Too simple to fight well. For a second, the room got narrow. I saw the cabinet he had fixed that week, the bills he paid without showing me, the dinner he left warming after my events. I saw all the ways he had been saying something in a language I refused to count. Then my phone lit up on the table. Adrian. Just his name. One message asking if I was okay and if Graham had been unfair when we got home. The door opened in my mind, small and ugly. I could have answered with the truth. I could have told Adrian that Graham was my husband and that whatever softness Adrian thought he had found in me had a wall around it. I could have ended the hunger right there. Instead, I picked up the phone and typed that Graham was making everything hard again and that I was tired of being treated like kindness was a crime. I watched the message send. The door closed. Graham saw my face change. He asked if that was Adrian. I told him he was proving my point by asking. That was when my tactic changed. I decided I would give Graham just enough compromise to make him look unreasonable if he kept pressing. I told him I would talk to Adrian. I said I would create clearer lines. I made my voice soft, almost generous, because softness can be a weapon when people expect guilt. Graham did not thank me. He only picked up his phone, turned it in his hand once, and set it face down again. That annoyed me more than I wanted to admit. 2 days later, I met Nolan at a coffee shop near the event studio because he said he had photos from Simone's party to send me. The place smelled like burnt espresso and wet coats. Nolan had his camera bag under the chair and did not take it off his shoulder, as if he was not staying long. He showed me a few harmless pictures first. Simone with the cake, Mara laughing near the drinks, Graham standing by the fire. Then he stopped scrolling before the sofa photos came up. He asked if Adrian knew I was never actually leaving my husband. I rolled my eyes and told him everyone was turning one cold night into a scandal. Nolan said Graham had not looked jealous. He said Graham had looked finished. I did not like that word. Finished sounded too clean, too decided. I told Nolan he was being dramatic because men always got protective when another man looked foolish. He put his phone away and said Adrian was the one who looked foolish. That was the S4 clue, though I did not call it anything. Nolan was the person near Graham I never counted. I saw him as a photographer with opinions, not as someone who had been watching the same room from a better angle. After that, the circle around me changed in small, insulting ways. Tessa stopped liking my posts. Simone answered my messages the next afternoon instead of the same hour. Mara sent shorter replies with fewer emojis and no voice notes. Adrian, though, stayed warm. Adrian still asked if I needed anything. Adrian still made me feel like a woman someone could choose before she begged. So when Graham told me one last time that I needed to tell Adrian the truth before someone else did, I did not hear warning. I heard a husband trying to win back power he had already lost. And I decided I would make the next refusal public. By the next gathering at Simone's house, I was no longer reacting to Graham. I was setting the room myself. That is an important difference, even if people pretend it is not. Reaction can be blamed on pressure. A plan belongs to the person who makes it. I chose my dress because it looked soft, not sharp. I chose the thin coat because I knew the evening air would get cold. I chose not to bring a scarf. Of course, none of that was a crime. A woman is allowed to be cold. A woman is allowed to have a best friend who notices. Before we left, Graham stood by the bedroom door with his phone low in one hand and asked me to be honest with Adrian before the night turned into another performance. That was his final clean offer, though I did not call it that. He said if I told Adrian the truth and stopped keeping him close for attention, then he and I could finally talk about what our marriage had become. He did not promise to forgive me. He did not beg. He only left one door open and waited to see if I would walk through it. I told my husband the one thing he could not deny. I told him he had stopped courting me the day he thought marriage made me permanent. I told him he fixed cabinets, paid bills, and managed our life like I was another item on a list. His face changed because it was true. He had no good answer. That should have been enough. But I used the truth like a knife and kept cutting. I told him Adrian made me feel like a woman because Graham had made me feel like a completed task. Graham looked down at his phone, turned it once in his hand, and set it face down on the dresser. Quiet again. Always quiet when I wanted heat. At Simone's house, the glass garden room was warm at first, but people kept walking out to the patio, and cold air slipped in each time the door opened. Adrian arrived after us. He looked tired, but when he saw me rub my arms, his whole body shifted toward me. That small movement fed something in me. Graham saw it. Nolan saw it. Tessa saw it from near the wine table. I let the moment grow. Then I looked toward the folded grey blanket on the chair and smiled like the thought had only just arrived. Adrian picked it up before anyone else could move. He asked if I wanted it. I did not take it from his hands. I sat on the low sofa near the patio door and waited. He sat beside me. The blanket opened between us. I guided his arm around my shoulders as if it were the most natural thing in the room. His hand hesitated. I leaned closer. That was the line. Not because of the blanket, because I made sure everyone knew I had chosen the shape of it. Graham stood near the long table, his phone low again, his face calm enough to insult me. So I said lightly that at least someone still remembered how to keep me warm. The room did not laugh. Adrian smiled for 1 second, then looked at Graham and lost half of it. I ignored that. My husband asked if this was really the version of myself I wanted people to remember. I told him people would remember that another man still cared enough to try. He said he would handle things properly. No threat, no raised voice, just that flat sentence. I read it as surrender because I needed it to be surrender. After the party, I messaged Mara a photo of the blanket folded over my knees and wrote that Graham had finally gone quiet. Mara replied almost an hour later that she did not want to be involved. No joke, no flame emoji, nothing to hold. I set the phone face down and told myself she was getting old. By the time Adrian texted asking why Graham wanted everyone at Simone's garden room the next evening, I smiled. My husband had finally become desperate enough to make the scene himself. The glass garden room at Simone's house was warmer than the patio, but nobody looked comfortable. The windows reflected the small lights outside, so every face appeared twice, one real and one pale in the glass. Graham stood near the long table with his phone in his hand. Adrian was by the sofa. Nolan had his arms folded. Tessa stayed close to the door. Mara was not there. Of course, I noticed that first and decided it meant nothing. My husband looked at me, then at Adrian, and smiled. Not the sad smile from our hallway, not the tired one from the car. A calm smile. Clean. Finished. He said the first thing he remembered was the night I told him Adrian's attention was harmless because it was useful. My hand went to the back of a chair and I kept it there. He did not argue. He did not accuse. He placed his phone on the table and played the pattern back in pieces I had already lived through. Adrian bringing coffee. Adrian leaving dinner to drive me home. My messages about missing warmth. The birthday party sofa. The grey blanket. My voice saying Graham was not the type to make a scene. The second party. My line about someone still remembering how to keep me warm. Each piece had looked small when I held it alone. On that table, with everyone watching, they had weight. The phone face down had not been him shutting down. The phone low in his hand had not been weakness. His calm had not been empty. It had been storage. I tried to take the room back. I said he was making friendship look ugly because he could not handle being compared. I said clips could lie. I turned to Adrian because Adrian had always softened when I sounded hurt. Graham tapped the screen again. My own voice filled the room saying I did not want Adrian. Not really, but I liked that he still tried. I liked having proof that I could still make a man show up. Adrian's face changed slowly. Not all at once. That was worse. He looked at me like each second was removing one layer from a person he had protected in his mind. I told him Graham was twisting it. I told him he knew me. Adrian did not answer. He picked up the grey blanket from the chair beside him, folded it once and placed it on the table between us. Then he walked out through the garden door. Tessa followed him without looking back. Simone did not stop them. Nolan looked at the blanket and said Graham had not added anything that we had not already seen. I looked for Mara again. Empty doorway. Empty chair. No voice note waiting to save me. That evening, a process server handed me a divorce petition with temporary property and financial orders attached. I moved into a short-term apartment above a pharmacy where the heater clicked all night. The joint accounts were restricted until the first review. Simone stopped inviting me, and Nolan's photos from that season cut around my face. Adrian blocked me after one message saying kindness had been the leash. At work, the jokes about my personal brand started landing sharp instead of charming. I still think Graham was cold. I still think my husband forgot that a wife needs to be chosen in ways she can feel. But I did not use Adrian because I loved him, and I did not provoke Graham because I wanted freedom. I wanted two men hurting in two different ways, both proving I mattered. The grey wool blanket sat in a storage box for weeks, folded better than I ever deserved. The last warm thing Adrian ever gave me became the proof that I had never warmed anyone back.